The asylums were prisons for the giants. They did not die. The psychiatric asylums of the 1850s had beds 9 feet long. The restraints were designed for 14-inch wrists. The doorways measured 10 feet high. They were not built for humans. I found the original architectural plans for Danvers State Hospital in Massachusetts. Construction began in 1874. The specifications are still in the state archives. Patient rooms, 12-foot ceilings. Doorways, 10 feet high by 5 feet wide. Beds, 9 feet long by 4 feet wide. Not hospital beds for normal humans. Not even beds for tall humans. Beds for giants. The official explanation was ventilation standards, furniture moving requirements, and institutional design preferences of the era. The explanation stops when you ask about the beds. There is no reasonable answer for why a psychiatric hospital would need beds 9 feet long, unless the patients were not human-sized. The asylum boom begins in the 1840s, exactly when mudflood evidence starts appearing across North America and Europe. By the 1850s, massive psychiatric institutions are rising in nearly every major region. By the 1860s, they are filling with patients whose origins are mysteriously undocumented. And by the 1880s, when the giants have completely disappeared from public view, the asylums are operating at full capacity. Isolated, restricted, patient populations that officials refuse to discuss in specific terms. This raises a simple but critical question. What if the mud flood was not an extermination event? What if it was a capture operation? What if the giants did not die? What if they were imprisoned? Buildings that remember. I have visited 17 of the major asylums built between 1850 and 1890. Most are abandoned now. Some have been converted to other uses. A few remain partially operational. But the original structures are intact, and they all show the same impossible proportions. Athens Lunatic Asylum in Ohio, built from 1867 to 1874. The main corridor runs over 800 feet, with ceilings that soar 25 feet high. The windows in patient wings measure 12 feet tall. The staircases have risers built for strides requiring someone over 8 feet tall to climb comfortably. Why build a psychiatric hospital with staircases that short humans struggle to navigate? Why create corridors so vast they echo? Why install windows at heights that prevent normal patients from seeing outside? Unless the original patients weren't normal-sized, unless these weren't hospitals, but prisons, built to contain beings whose physical capabilities required architecture at this scale to effectively confine them. The evidence they ordered. Then I found the procurement records, an order from 1858 at the Utica Psychiatric Center in New York, a requisition for patient restraints. The specifications are detailed. Leather straps for wrists measuring 14 inches in circumference. Ankle restraints for legs 28 inches around. Waist restraints built to accommodate girths from 60 inches to 70 inches. Those are not human proportions. The order was for 200 sets of giant scaled restraints for a single institution in a single year. How many giants were they holding? How many of these beings were imprisoned in facilities across North America and Europe? And here's where it gets uncomfortable. The asylum construction boom corresponds exactly with the orphan train timeline. While mysterious children were being distributed to populate cities the giants had vacated, the giants themselves were being systematically rounded up, imprisoned in institutions built specifically to contain them. It's a complete population replacement program. Remove the giants from society. Place them in remote facilities where they can't interact with the inheritor population. Fill their cities with normal-sized humans who won't question the architectural scale mismatches, and wait for time and mortality to eliminate the imprisoned giants naturally. No mass executions, no evidence, no martyrs. Just institutional confinement until the problem solved itself. The fortress hospitals, the locations confirm it. These asylums weren't built in city centers where they could serve local populations. They were built in remote areas, isolated, difficult to access, surrounded by walls that would look excessive for mentally ill humans. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in West Virginia sits on 666 acres of remote mountain land. The building itself is over a quarter of a mile long. It was designed to hold 250 patients. By the 1880s, it was housing over 2,400 patients. The official story calls this overcrowding, a humanitarian crisis caused by inadequate funding and too many mentally ill individuals. But here is what does not make sense. The building was designed for 250 patients in rooms scaled for beings 8 to 10 feet tall. If you filled those rooms with normal-sized humans averaging 5 to 6 feet, you could easily house 2,400 without any overcrowding. The rooms are enormous. The corridors are vast. The capacity would be more than sufficient if the patients were smaller than the building's original intended occupants. What if what officials called overcrowding was not real? What if it was replacement? What if the original giant prisoners were gradually dying, and the authorities were filling the vacant spaces with human patients to maintain the facade? By the 1880s, the transition was nearly complete. The giants were almost entirely gone. These massive institutions were repurposed for conventional psychiatric care. That would explain why asylum construction peaked in the 1850s through the 1870s, exactly when the giants were disappearing, and why, by the 1890s, the construction boom ended. They had built sufficient capacity. They had contained the population they needed. I have spent months trying to access original admission records from major asylums in the 1850s through the 1880s. Most have been destroyed. The official explanation points to fires, floods, and routine disposal of outdated medical records. But the pattern of destruction is too consistent. Kirkbride buildings, the iconic asylum design used across America, all show the same record gaps. Admission documents from the first 20 to 30 years of operation are missing. Patient demographics are unavailable. Documentation of who was housed in these institutions during their early decades has been systematically eliminated. What records do survive are heavily redacted, or they describe patients in the vaguest possible terms. Persons of unusual stature admitted from unknown origins. Individuals requiring specialized accommodation due to physical proportions. Patients transferred from frontier territories with no documented family connections. These are not descriptions of mental illness. These are descriptions of physical difference, of size, of beings who did not fit normal demographic categories and required institutions built to different scales. This is not coincidence. This is not random record loss. Deliberate suppression. The security that made no sense. The deeper I went into asylum architecture, the more I noticed security features that seem excessive for mentally ill humans. Danvers State Hospital had walls around the entire complex, measuring 15 feet high. The windows in patient wings were barred with iron reinforcements, thick enough to support enormous weight. The doors were solid oak, 8 inches thick, with locking mechanisms appropriate for maximum security prisons. Why would you need prison-level security for psychiatric patients? Why build walls 15 feet high with guard towers at regular intervals? Why create an institutional environment that looks more like a fortress than a hospital? Unless you were holding prisoners. Unless those prisoners had physical capabilities that normal security measures could not contain. Unless you were imprisoning beings who could break through conventional doors, who could climb ordinary walls. Beings who required architectural containment at scales, matching their physical size and strength. The photographs that do not exist. There are images of asylum exteriors from the 1860s and the 1870s. Photographs of staff members. Carefully staged shots of rehabilitation activities. But there are almost no photographs of actual patients from the first decades of operation. Why? If these were humanitarian institutions caring for mentally ill individuals, why would they not document their patients? Why would they not create visual records? Unless the patients could not be photographed. Unless their appearance would raise questions the authorities did not want to answer. Unless documenting beings 8 to 10 feet tall would contradict the official narrative that giants did not exist. I found one photograph, a single image. Willard Asylum for the Chronic Insane in New York, dated 1869. It shows a figure, heavily wrapped in restraints, being transported on what the caption describes, a specialized conveyance cart. The cart is massive, built to carry weight far beyond what any normal human would require. And the figure in the restraints, though partially obscured, is clearly of extraordinary size. The photograph exists in a private collection, never published. The descendant who owns it said their great-grandfather worked at Willard and kept the image hidden for decades. He told his family it showed one of the old ones, the ones they brought in from the territories before anyone knew what to do with them. The old ones, the ones from the territories. As if there were different categories of patients, as if some predated the conventional psychiatric admissions, as if some were there for reasons other than mental illness. I interviewed descendants of asylum workers from the late 1800s. Many families have stories that were never written down. These accounts describe tall patients, special cases who required different treatment, and areas of asylums that regular staff were not permitted to access. One woman told me her great-great-grandmother worked as a nurse at the Rockland Psychiatric Center in New York in the 1870s. Family tradition held that there was a restricted ward housing patients of exceptional size. Some of those patients were never included in official counts. Some patients had their deaths recorded in separate registers that were later destroyed. The restricted ward occupied an entire wing. It had its own entrance, its own dedicated staff, and its own security protocols. According to family memory, it was gradually emptied over 20 years, as the patients died off and were buried in unmarked graves on asylum grounds. Unmarked graves. That is another pattern that repeats across asylum sites. The graves sized for giants. Almost every major institution built between 1850 and 1890 has a cemetery on its grounds, and almost all of them contain sections with unmarked graves, hundreds of them, sometimes thousands. The official explanation says these were pauper burials, unclaimed patients who died without family or resources. But the burial plots are strange. The graves are unusually large, not normal human grave size. Plots measuring 10 to 12 feet in length, 6 feet wide, and excavated to depths that seem excessive. Graves sized for giants. Graves that would accommodate bodies 8 to 10 feet tall. Graves with no markers, no documentation, no identification beyond plot numbers that were later lost or destroyed. At the Athens Lunatic Asylum, the cemetery contains 1,930 graves. Only 31 have marked headstones. The rest are identified only by numbers carved into small stones. But even those numbers have become unreliable. The cemetery records that would connect numbers to names have disappeared. Destroyed in a fire in 1978. How convenient. How many giants are buried there? How many beings who survived the mud flood, who were captured and imprisoned, who died in confinement over decades? We will never know, because the evidence was deliberately eliminated. The complete system. Ask yourself how this worked as a complete operation. The mud flood buries the infrastructure in the 1840s to the 1850s. The catastrophic event creates chaos, displacement, the perfect cover for systematic roundup. The giants are captured, transported to remote institutions built specifically to contain them. Imprisoned not for crimes, but for being what they were. Meanwhile, the orphan trains deploy mysterious children to populate the vacated cities. 250,000 children with no documented origins, distributed to fill architecture, scaled for different occupants. The asylums hold the witnesses. The beings who could testify to what the world looked like before. They knew the truth about who built the cities, who operated the technology. Lock them away. Wait for them to die. Bury them. Without markers. And in a single generation, rewrite history so completely that the giants become myth. Their imprisonment becomes humanitarian psychiatry. Their architectural legacy becomes inexplicable. Victorian excess. What happened inside? I keep thinking about what it must have been like. Being a giant in the 1850s or the 1860s, watching your world literally get buried, watching smaller humans arrive and claim your cities, and then being taken. Not killed, taken. Transported to a remote institution, locked in a massive building with others like you, told you are mentally ill, that your memories of the old world are delusions, that your insistence on your own history is a symptom requiring treatment, imprisoned for being what you were, held until you died, buried in an unmarked grave, erased from history as completely as if you'd never existed at all. That's not extinction through catastrophe. That's systematic elimination through institutional confinement. That's genocide disguised as mental health care. The buildings that won't lie. The evidence persists because architecture cannot be destroyed as easily as paper records. Restraints sized for 14-inch wrists. 9-foot beds. 10-foot doorways. 25-foot ceilings. Massive burial plots. Destroyed records. restricted wards, isolated locations, fortress-like security. All of it points to the same conclusion. The asylums were giant prisons. The mudflood did not kill them. It created the chaos necessary to round them up. And for 40 to 50 years, from the 1850s through the 1890s, the authorities held them in remote institutions, waiting for time to solve the problem that mass execution would have made too obvious. The Kirkbride buildings still stand, many of them. Massive stone complexes with their distinctive batwing design. Buildings so large that modern developers struggle to find uses for them. Buildings with ceiling heights and corridor widths that exceed any practical need for human-scale occupation. These were not built for humans. They were built for giants. They were prisons, not hospitals. And the humanitarian facade was cover for a systematic imprisonment program designed to remove the giants from society while maintaining plausible deniability. The asylums were prisons. The patients were giants. The records were destroyed. The graves are unmarked. And we're living on top of the evidence. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you understand what the asylums actually were, you have to ask what else we've been lied about. What other institutions served purposes they weren't designed for? What other populations were systematically removed, and their removal disguised as something benevolent? The buildings stand empty now, most of them. Abandoned. Too large to maintain. Too expensive to demolish. Monuments to a crime we're not supposed to remember. Check the asylum in your state. Measure the doorways. Look at the burial grounds. Count the unmarked graves. Tell me what you find. The giants didn't die in the mudflood. They were captured, imprisoned, held in institutions built specifically to contain them. And they died there, slowly, over decades, while the world outside forgot they ever existed. What else are we walking past every day, too big to see?